So we had, excuse me, so after this meeting, or during this meeting, like we're sitting there and we're watching all the people from our team members pop up. So whew, thank God everybody's safe and sound. And then we were told that there was going to be no more decision review office. And I'm like, what do you mean? I just gave up a job being the director. And now you're saying that the job I gave it up for is no longer here? Like felt, I was furious and I felt fooled. I felt tricked and it felt awful. Because 2 weeks prior, I was just talked in to staying. And we all know that when you're going to disband a complete government department, those conversations take more than 2 weeks. Like they were making the decision review office external. And I'm like, it doesn't make sense. Like legislation says it's an internal review. Um, but they had decided to disband the decision review office and send all of WorkSafe New Brunswick appeals to McGinnis Cooper. McGinnis Cooper down in Halifax. So I urge you to go on and look at some of the work McGinnis Cooper does. They do great work at representing employers. Lots of their, I have snapshots, and because I see that their website has changed a little bit since I started reporting on it. Like um, their headings are McGinnis Cooper successfully represent an employer in a human rights complaint. McGinnis Cooper webinar, how to hold the tight reins on your employees, right? So they're an employer-based law firm, which is fine because there are disabled and disabled based law firms who focus on um, representing injured workers, right? So it's fine that there's these law firms, but they should not be reviewing the information. Not only is that a breach of privacy, because every little bit of their medical information, of a claimant's medical information, is sent to Stuart McGivray, or sorry, McGinnis Cooper, not Stuart McGivray. I apologize. And they're not subject matter experts. Every lawyer I spoke to, when I asked, what was your education on like the Workers' Compensation Act? And every single lawyer that I spoke to, and I think there was about maybe 13, said, we basically had one course that said the Workers' Compensation Act is extremely specialized. Leave it to the Workers' Compensation Act specialists, right? So they know it exists, but basically don't touch it. And they were sending all the appeals to articling students. Like, yeesh. So, and they weren't good. Like, because we had, like, back when they were talking about giving contracts to me, they were already giving contracts out to the law firms. And we had conversations that they would take a file and have it for the longest time and come back, and the decision wouldn't be quality decision. It would be it didn't make sense. They weren't weighing the information properly, and they didn't know the legal test, because you have to be an expert to be a decision review officer for claims, right? Shouldn't be something you do right out the gate. You should probably have worked in it for a lot of years before you start upholding and overturning their decisions. Um, so it was heavy. I was heartbroken because I had agreed to stay at this job that I loved and gave up that job in Alberta. Like I had my son registered in school and everything, folks. Like we were heading west. And 2 weeks later, my job was gone. There was no more office that I even worked at. So talk about shady stuff, right? So I mean, I called David Luther right to task. I'm like, what the heck? Like I feel like I was deceived a little bit and fooled a little bit. Like I should be in Alberta right now, running up a complete department of about 150 employees. Now I don't even have my position here. Oh, don't worry, don't worry. We're going to put you in another position. We're going to fit you in, and everybody else was going to claims. But keep in mind, I had that issue with Melody that said Melody and I can't work together. That's what Jody Carr, I believe is his name, what he said. They shouldn't be working together. Basically, I have integrity and Melody doesn't, so maybe they shouldn't work together because Tanya's going to call her out on her shit. That's not what it said, but basically, that was the agreement. Like, I'm always going to call people out when they're doing the wrong thing, especially when you're putting disabled and injured workers at risk. Yeah, you best believe I'm going to speak up about it every single time. Okay? Every time. So I said, so we started going through the process of looking at new positions for me within WorkSafe New Brunswick. So I'm like, okay, what's here? So because of my background, like I said, because I'm not working in claims and I have this piece of paper here from Jody Carr saying, no, she doesn't need to work with this person. So they offered me a senior investigator job because of my background, right? I had been in claims for a decade and I have previous law enforcement background as well. So they thought, perfect. You know the legislation, the policies and procedures, plus you have law enforcement. You're going to be great in this job. I'm like, yeah, I think I will too. So I accepted the position as senior investigator. And guess what? Guess what happened? Investigations was no longer kept out and external of claims. It was brought under claims, which all the investigators, especially the RCMP investigators, had a huge issue with. They were very vocal about it, how claims cannot be directing investigations. And there was one very outspoken investigator, and he said, you know, the day that Dino starts directing my investigation is the day I submit my resignation, or claims, or anybody. The day claims tries to direct our investigation, we're out, because then we're not impartial. And it's not right. Like, if you look at any other board across Canada, their investigations is either a separate entity in itself or under the general counsel. But now it's underneath claims. So I'm like, whatever. Like, what am I supposed to do? Am I supposed to just like not work? I had already burnt my bridge in Alberta after they had made all these arrangements for me to move out there, and I basically left them high and dry on a promise from David Luther. So I was like, okay, let's give it a try, right? We shouldn't have to work with her too much, is basically what HR told me. You shouldn't really have to work with her too much. Like, you're an investigator and she's quality assurance. I'm like, yeah, you're right. We shouldn't have to talk too much. I basically deal with the claim owners and maybe the supervisors. Certainly not quality assurance. Like, that doesn't make any sense. Quality assurance are people that's supposed to just be looking over the claims and making sure that the right decisions are made. But that's not quality assurance here. Basically, they made a whole new department for Melody to dictate how claim owners manage their decisions, which is really unfortunate, because I know I've been hard on WorkSafe and I know I've named a few names, which makes people uncomfortable. There's some wonderful decision makers there. Like, hear me when I say, the staff at the Decision Review Office, who are now throughout WorkSafe in different roles, are great people, like good workers. Hear me when I say that as my time as an investigator, I got to know a lot of other case managers and adjudicators and managers and wonderful, good people. But there's people in key positions that are preventing these wonderful people being the good decision makers that they are. They're restricting them from doing that. And it's an injustice, because they hate their jobs because they're basically overworked and they don't have autonomy over their decision making, right? Which is, it goes against everything in administrative justice and all my education and training and background. Like, it goes against everything, how WorkSafe is run. So I accepted the position as a senior investigator. And part of that was I was responsible for what they called was a management support inbox. So basically, all the difficult clients, and there are some very difficult clients who are difficult for no reason. And then there are some who are just accountability keepers, right? They are their advocate, they are their own advocate, and they're smart, and they're not going to be taken advantage of, and they're going to ask the right questions every time. So, um, just to go back, when I accepted the position as senior investigator, like my job title was very clear and direct. I've said it a million times. My job description was to protect the integrity of the workers' compensation system. That's it. I wasn't a decision maker. I was to protect the integrity of the workers' compensation system. And when I accepted that position, never once did I ever expect or anticipate that I would be protecting the workers' compensation system against its employees, against some of its employees, because I can't just do a big wash and say it's everybody, because there's so many wonderful people that work there. People who I am secretly in touch with because they've been told some pretty horrible things about me, and basically say, as if they're friends with me, their job's on the line, and I believe them. Based on my experience, I believe them. So moving forward in this new position as a senior investigator, protecting the integrity of the workers' compensation system, I was made to manage this box. And they said, you know the act, plus you're good with people, perfect job for you. Great, no problem. So, so basically, I'm wearing two hats, right? I'm managing claim stuff, which really was not part of a senior investigator job description. But I took it as I'm just facilitating information. That's how I took it, right? So there was one person in particular who was a target of our investigation, who was also in the management support inbox. And technically, this person was close to me, so should have been in my district, that I should have been doing the investigation and surveilling and things like that. But I made it very clear that I felt that that was inappropriate. Here I am, on one hand, in this management support inbox, building trust and working with some difficult clients. And this particular client, I felt that we were gaining trust. And I think it's because I recognized right away that she was asking all the right questions. And even when because if somebody asked a question, if I couldn't answer it by using legislation or policy, then I was to go to the decision maker and get the answer to that question. And the decision maker would give me the answer, and then I would send it off to that claimant. And I found that when I was asking the questions, I was getting the same type of pushback that this client was. And I'm just like, this doesn't make sense. This is an injured worker. She absolutely should know the answers to these questions. And she's super smart. So she knows what questions to ask. Okay. So as I'm processing and talking with her file, and I'm asking the questions and I'm trying to get the answers, and I'm starting to get a little pushback from the claims department. Why are you talking to her so much? And I'm like, well, like I'm building a relationship with her. And like I said in the beginning of this video, from my experience, if a client is difficult, it's because there's a disconnect. They're not understanding. So you put more and more time in with difficult clients so they can understand how the decisions are made. And although they don't agree with it, they can understand. And sometimes that's the best that you're ever going to get in a situation, right? But I didn't understand the decisions either. And I used to be reviewing their files. So I'm like, no, you need to answer this question. So, and it was really hard for me to keep my decision review hat in my closet because there was no longer a decision review office. Okay. So as she's asking questions, and she's asking the right questions, like we're waiting for this appeal to come through on job suitability. And like, Another thing that really bothered me that we would like, we talked about this. My supervisor, his name was Michael Hallett, and let me tell you, I was fiercely protective of Michael Hallett. There was this one external contractor who was rough on him, and I got really protective of him. You know, like when people are treated poorly, I don't like it, and I don't like it, and um, and I just kind of get a little protective of him, right? So, all around, like this was now, like we're probably in the beginnings of 2024, 2023, I would say, beginnings of 2023. So I had been in my senior investigator role since the year prior. And um, the more I'm seeing and hearing conversations, it's just, it's everything that I thought claims would be. Um, you know, laughing at people, calling them crazy, calling them wingnuts, just some really distasteful activities. Like no respect for the injured worker. In my opinion, no, based on what I've seen, there's a lot of people who do not respect the injured worker. So this particular, like, as surveillance was going on this claimant, this lady claimant, I refused to do surveillance. I said, I'm not going to be building a relationship with her on one hand and surveilling her on the other hand. Like, that doesn't pass my gut check, right? And my boss was great. Yeah, no problem, Tanya. I understand that, right? Like, I thought he was very supportive. So, um, they continued surveillance, and I didn't know that they had been surveilling her for almost 10 years. It was clicking on over 7 years, and now we are where we are. Like, we're going on 10 years that this injured worker has been abused by the system because they didn't like her, because she was asking the exact same or the exact right questions at the exact same times, and she was holding them accountable. So she was seen as a problem. And um, I could feel, and her words showed me that how I was managing the inbox was working, right? Like all that I had been taught at WCB Alberta, when I used those skills and techniques here at WorkSafe New Brunswick, they were working. Because she would say things like, I don't know who this is, because I wasn't allowed to tell her my name. I don't know who this is, but you're different. She said, you're different. You're the only person that's ever treated me with respect. And um, like she'd be like, I read your message with my husband, or I read your message with my counselor, because WorkSave New Brunswick has like targeted her, and it gone up through the WCAT that they made them pay counseling because of how her claim was processed, right? So she's been she's like a battered woman, except at WorkSafe, you know what I mean? Like, and I could, my empathy, like she could feel my empathy through my messaging, even though that I tried to be very, you know, non-impartial, and just tried to be the person to facilitate the information between her and her claim owners. And and she was like, thank you. Like, I don't know who you are, but thank you. Right? So um, we are waiting for her WCAT. That is the workers confirmation, like administrative tribunal. So basically, they review um, all the decisions at a WorkSafe, and they either say yep, right or wrong. So we are waiting for um, her decision to come back, and it was on job suitability. So I'm always in contact with the claim owners, and her decision comes in. And the position that they had identified for her, you needed a certain designation, like a professional license to have, and she no longer had hers because she lost it because of her work injury. Okay, so when the job went Job suitability went up through the decision review office, and it went um, up to the WCAT. The WCAT sends it back and says, no, like she's not, this isn't suitable. She doesn't have this designation. And let me be very clear. I accept that she doesn't have this designation because of her work injury. She can't do this job. It's not suitable. So I messaged the claim owner, and her name is Sarah. And I'm like, hey, Sarah, just to let you know that the WCAT come back, and like we chatted for a little bit. It's not suitable. So she's like, yeah, I knew it wasn't suitable. And I'm like, what? And she said, well, she said, I had called around to a bunch of different agencies that employ this particular occupation, and you need to have this designation. And I knew she didn't have it. I knew it wasn't going to stick. And I'm like, wait a second. I said, I reviewed that file. I didn't see anywhere on the file where it said that you had called all of these places and that the job wasn't suitable. Well, I didn't put that on the claim file, she said. So here I am now. This is my ethical dilemma. I've told you my background. I've taken oaths. And when I take an oath, I take it very seriously. And around the same time, there was a request coming in from the Ombudsman New Brunswick requesting information. And I was told when communicating about this person's claim file never to put her name or never to use her claim number, just to use, and they had 2 specific code words to use for this particular injured worker, just to use these code words. So we had talked about that in our meetings with Michael Hallett, like the other investigators and myself, saying like this is used to manipulate a FOIP request, and we're not comfortable with that. Like we're not comfortable with that. Like as investigators, when we put in a request, because we had the authority to compel evidence. And let me tell you, if we were an investigator and we put in a request for something and had known that the place held back and didn't give us information, then there's repercussions to that, okay? So knowing what we expect of other places and knowing what I know about the law and administrative justice, I was feeling awful. I was feeling awful that this claim owner had sent and hid this information back from the decision review office, because we were still in place then. And hear me when I say, it never would have got to the WCAT if that information would have been on a file. Somebody at the DRO would have said, sorry, like this isn't suitable. You see all these file notes that you have, but they weren't there. They were hidden back, right? So I talked to the communications lady that I worked with closely. I don't want to say her name because she's wonderful and probably will be targeted. And I talked to the other senior investigators about it. And I said, I don't know what to do. Like, how am I supposed to talk to this woman? Like, what am I supposed to do? The ombudsman is submitting a request for information. Like, all that information that I know isn't going to be picked up on their FOIP request isn't going to be sent to the ombudsman. I said, I can't be part of that. I can't be part of holding information back from the ombudsman request. Like, I have mad respect for the ombudsman, and I'm a little scared of him, quite frankly, and I'm not doing that. So the other investigators was like, whew, yeah, that's tough. Like, that makes it really hard to do what we're doing, right? And to stand behind what we're doing and what we're saying. And I'm like, yeah, I'm going to bring it up to my boss. And I did. And I brought it up to Michael Hallett, and I brought it up in conversation, and then I started putting it in emails. And I noticed that the way I was treated started to change. This was all about around February, I would say February of 2023. And then on March 3rd of 2023, unfortunately, my niece was murdered, and I was off on a leave because, my brother's daughter was beat to death. And my sister and I flew out west to see him. And I just, when somebody, death is hard in any family. The death of your niece or nephew, like your brother's kids, um, death is hard. But to have somebody's life taken so violently at the hands of a person who was supposed to love them was devastating to our family. And it's still devastating. Like, it's really, really hard for me to speak about. So I was on disability from my niece being beat to death. And then in April, I still wasn't back to work. I was trying to get back to work, but I noticed they started taking like some of my tasks away from me. And my boss kept saying, how much of you being off work is because emotion, how much of it is physical, and when you gonna be back, right? And he was talking about things that I just like usually like in my background, like having taken sick time before in the past, like I never talked to my supervisor about things like that. That was just dealt with HR, and it made me very uncomfortable. And so I tried to like play it off. No, I'm doing better. I'm doing better, right? Because I didn't want him to hold anything against me. And please keep in mind that I also left out that before I had taken time off from work for when my niece was murdered, I had gone through a performance evaluation with Michael Hallett, and it was impeccable. And I've been trying to get access to that ever since, and I'll go into that at the end of this video. So I was just being treated differently, and I like when Michael Hallett's his father-in-law passed away, and like Mike's probably 60 or 55 maybe, and so his father-in-law's in his at least 60s or 70s, and when he died unexpectedly, like I gathered the group and made sure that we sent his wife flowers because I have empathy and I know what it's like to lose a parent. So I made sure that we got all the guys. There was two other guys that was in my group, and I got together, got some flowers. I reached out to an old coworker, found out where my boss lived, and we got the flowers delivered to where his house is. And he was very thankful. When my niece was brutally murdered, I never got anything, right? I was just an annoyance now because what were they going to do with my files? And there was a few people from WorkSafe that had reached out to me, and they still work there. They're case managers, and I will forever hold their name and their messages about my niece being murdered close to my heart. So while I was still on disability, of course, since I was a single mom, like I had said, I had taken protections out to ensure that I had like long term, like I paid an extra $100 and some a month for long term disability, just in case anything happened to me. I needed to be able to care for my son because I wasn't getting anything anywhere else. So I had paid for this long-term disability. So I was actively talking like a little bit on the side to my boss about maybe taking some time off, and he was getting frustrated because it was mixed messaging, and it was because I was really put in a really hard place talking to him about my mental health, which I did not feel comfortable with. There was also an incident of an external provider who we were out doing surveillance, and at the end of the day, the whole team would go out and go for supper, and then we would all go back to our respective hotel rooms. And this guy here was inappropriate with me. Okay, he sent me some text messages, basically saying how horny he was and how beautiful I was, and I just didn't. I was sexually assaulted in the past, and I just didn't want to work with him anymore. I didn't want him to lose his contract. I just didn't want to work with him anymore. And I had said that to my boss. And all while like all this was going on with my sister, my poor niece who was beat to death by a man. I was sexually assaulted by a man in the past, and then my niece was beat to death, And now this external contractor was inappropriate with me sexually. And I said, listen, he can work with the other guys. I don't want to work with them. There's other officers, there's other investigators who can work with him. I don't need to work with him. I can work with somebody else. Like, before I come, he worked with the other investigators all fine and dandy. I was never there, like, and he wouldn't let it go. He just kept insisting that he speak with me, um, that we meet, and he kept talking to my coworkers about what was going on, and I was getting frustrated. Like, I want to move on from this. I don't want to talk about what he said to me in every meeting. I don't want to have all these side meetings. Oh, Tanya, stay on for 10 more minutes. Well, we talk about what the external contractor, what he wants. And I'm just like, I don't care what he wants. Like, he can work here. I just don't want to work with him. Like, I'll use somebody else as an external contractor. And they just wouldn't let it go. So all of this was happening. And like, the more they kept talking about it, I'm like, I'm going to just take some time off. I'm going to go on my LTD and just do a little refresh. So my boss and I were supposed to meet, and I wasn't feeling up to it. So I said to him, because like, they weren't giving me bereavement for my niece being murdered. And I was like, well, that doesn't make sense. Like, how can somebody not get any time off from work when their niece is beat to death, right? So we were just kind of going back on things, and the things with this external contractor who was inappropriate with me. And I'm like, I'm gonna just take some time off and do a reset, focus on my mental health, and come back strong and able. So I had sent him a message saying, we're not going to meet tonight. Can we meet tomorrow? He said, yes, no problem. Right? So the next day we meet, and when I turn on the computer, I'm turning on the computer and I'm thinking, I'm going to tell this man I'm going to take some time off and go on my long-term disability. When I turned on the computer, I was terminated without cause. Okay. So then I received an email from Yvonne Collette. He was my HR partner, and his wife is an executive. She's hardly has education, and she's responsible for a few departments at WorkSafe. His wife is an executive, and he then sent me a letter basically saying, regarding your emails about unethical and illegal activity, you are not to go to the ombudsman. You are not to reach out to any political figures. And if you do that, basically, they're going to sue me, right? So I didn't know what to do. They had fired me when I was on disability. Which meant I didn't have access to my LTD anymore. I didn't know what to do. Again, like, what do you do? Like, I was always taught to do the right thing. Like, holy shit, if I wouldn't have done the right thing, my mom would have beat my ass. Like, rest in peace, Mom. But if we didn't do the right thing, we paid for it and we were punished. So it's just who I am, and I can't be anything else. So after all of that, I'm like talking to them about like everything. We're going back and forth, and I'm requesting certain information. And I'm just going to pause here and then come back on and do a separate video about the information that I was requesting.